Well, for one thing, I don't think it's a shift towards being less ideological. It's a shift towards being differently ideological. In fact, not really that differently.
Yeah.
So again, there are issues that are discussed and aren't. I mean, every issue of a journal you read, it becomes obvious. So for example, last night just happened to be reading one of the, I think maybe the best journal of international affairs, diplomatic history, which is a very good open journal, and they're questioning the concept. There's a series of articles on regionalism, and they're basically questioning the reliance in international relations theory on notions like national interest. And they're saying, well, this really is not a very clear notion. It's omitting a lot of things, and they study some of the things it's omitting. Like, for example, the differences in regions. So the South in the United States tends to have different concerns than the Northeast, which is true. But the crucial issue, the crucial reason why national interest IR theory is kind of missing the point, if you like, is it doesn't consider class interest. So it doesn't consider the crucial difference between, say, the corporate sector and the working class and their concerns about what policy ought to be. And they're very different. And furthermore, that difference affects policy very directly because the former are the decision makers, not the latter. But that issue just is barely discussed. So you can discuss regional concerns, but as soon as you touch class issues, it's kind of off the spectrum, even though those are critical ones. Well, that's ideology. That's a set of choices you're making about what you think is important. And it's one that's very closely related to the nature of the society. So it shows up, for example, in the social movements. Take, say, the civil rights movement. You want to study the in the United States. If you want to study it seriously, you have to notice a major element of it, a crucial element right at the center. As long as, let's take Martin Luther King, the sort of symbol of the civil rights movement. As long as he was focusing attention on racist sheriffs in Alabama, it was fine for elite opinion. He was honored, a hero. This is Martin Luther King Day. On Martin Luther King Day, everyone reads his I Have a Dream speech, 1963, and that's fine. Well, what happened after 1963? Very quickly, he turned attention to two things, class issues and the Indochina War. And he was completely smashed. If you look at what happened after that, you don't read his I Have a Dream speech in 1968. There was one. In fact, the day he was assassinated. If you look, he was in Memphis, Tennessee, supporting a sanitation workers strike. And he was about to lead a march from Memphis to Washington of civil rights activists, where they were going to organize a sort of a movement of the poor, which there is a race issue because there's a race-class correlation, but much broader. Well, he gave a speech, an eloquent speech, in which he said, he used a biblical analogy. He said, I feel that I'm like Moses. I can see the promised land. I'm not going to get there, but you'll get there. And the promised land will be a land of justice and equality and freedom and overcoming class oppression. Then he was assassinated. The march nevertheless took place, led by his wife, Coretta King, and they went through the contested regions of the South, the big struggles that they'd had. They ended up in Washington. I have to recall that this is the most liberal Congress in American history. They set up a tent city in Washington, Resurrection City. Congress ordered the security forces to go in the middle of the night and destroy it and kick them out of town, and they were driven out of town. Okay, that all this part of Martin Luther King's legacy is not celebrated on Martin Luther King Day. In fact, it's considered a kind of a blot on his record, along with his condemnation of the Vietnam War. And that shows, if you look at the effects of the civil rights movement in the North, I mean, there are some effects, but it basically was continued on very racist lines because class issues were involved, and that you just don't touch. In fact, I think the United States, some years ago, maybe this is still true, but a few years ago, last time I looked, the United States was one of the very few countries where the Census Bureau, which takes detailed statistics on everything you can imagine, it doesn't include class. If people try to do studies of, say, class health relations, the way they have to do it is by looking at race health relations, which are studied, and then try to determine the class status of the people of the various races by other criteria, and then indirectly they can get class health statistics. Well, that's deeply embedded in the culture, has obvious reasons based on the system of power in the society. It affects all work that's done in just about every field, including, for example, what I described yesterday, that I was reading yesterday. It just is, it's kind of like it's part of the perspective that intellectuals bring to things. You don't look at it, you know. And it's by now deeply embedded in the general culture. So, for example, I have a friend who teaches history at a state college, one of the better state colleges. And she told me that she asks, when she's teaching an incoming class on world history, on the first day she asks students to identify their class. And she says, "What class are you in?" They have two answers. If your father's a janitor, you're middle class. If your father's in jail, you're underclass. That's the class structure of the society. Is the national interest of the janitor the same as the CEO? Well, this question doesn't come up in the study of international affairs, national policy. Okay, that's, you know, I mean, it's not wrong to have a set of assumptions and perspectives, but you should be open and upfront about them. And as soon as you are, you can see how much the set of assumptions that's generally, not universally, but generally brought to studies does reflect the structure of power inside the society. Well, that should be a central topic of study. It's not, I don't want to say it's ignored, like you can find discussion of it, but it should be right at the center.